After 40 years in the study of well-being, Dr. Dean Shrock retired to the Oregon coast, where he remains an active voice in teaching why love heals. Today, Dr. Shrock will share with us how prayer is the art of believing. Prayer can take on many forms, and today Dr. Dean will guide us toward the knowledge of finding confidence in the eternal nature of our worthiness to approach, speak, and to be spoken to by God. So let us give a warm Ocean Unity welcome to Dr. Dean Shrock.
Thank you. Sometimes with all my notes and books, I feel it's a little unwieldy, but yes, as was just said in the announcement this week of talking about the power of prayer, and I titled it "Prayer is the Art of Believing," which comes from Neville Goddard, which I've spoken about the last 2 times. But indeed, prayer does take on many forms. It can be one of prayer, praise, or thanksgiving, hope and aspiration, request or appeal, communion with God within, and one of guidance. Now, because of my background, I always find a certain amount of comfort and confidence when I can cite some scientific support for any particular subject. And that's actually very much the case indeed with prayer. Some of you may know or know about Dr. Larry Dossey. Does that ring a bell for some of you? Well, I'm very pleased to know Larry, and chances are you know then about some of his books. Prayer is Good Medicine, Healing Words, The Power of Prayer and the Practice of Medicine. Be careful what you pray for, you just might get it. So again, I think that we can find some comfort in knowing that prayer can actually be grounded in science. One of the most clear ways for me, and I like giving you these examples, at least I find them helpful, and then hopefully you will, is when I mentioned the placebo effect. The idea that what you believe and expect is as healing or helpful as anything you'll ever do medically. You know, that's my background, so that's an example I'm very comfortable using. But no matter what the illness or no matter what the medical treatment, your belief or your expectation is at least as powerful as any medical treatment. It's coming back to the power of belief, like it concluded with the end of our first song. The power of prayer and your belief, or like Neville Goddard, prayer is the art of believing. So while within unity, and I love the major premises of unity around indeed our unity, we are God manifesting in infinite forms, but we have the power of God within us to have anything. And so appreciate again from the perspective of the placebo effect, that if you believe something strongly enough, the odds are absolutely that it will happen. Interestingly, in a survey that with Americans at least, that 90% of Americans pray at least occasionally and 2/3 daily. And there's a very practical, logical part of me, is because it works. It isn't just a holdover belief system from ages historically, you know, whatever the belief system, that prayer or your beliefs are so powerful, they really do work. Here's an actual quote from Larry Dossey. Evidence of prayer and healing is so great that in the future, prayer will become the standard in scientific medical practice. To not recommend prayer as part of medical care will constitute medical malpractice. So again, I hope that gives you some comfort. I certainly appreciate Dr. Dossey's perspective and so much evidence he brings to that. Another one is when I was first really doing my scientific work and my doctoral dissertation on guided imagery, I ran across and met actually Dr. William Broad. And in his study of guided imagery and prayer, or what he would call in general deliberate intention techniques, he said that there are 5 things that contribute to the effectiveness of prayer. 1, relaxation and quiet, training in some focused attention technique, guided imagery, intentionality, and positive emotions. And I don't want to get too technical, but I again appreciate my interest in noting the scientific perspectives. But some of you, I'm sure, also know Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, the biologist who talked about morphogenic fields. And indeed, according to Dr. Sheldrake, prayer acts like a blueprint to be filled in, as he explains, to these morphogenic fields. Now, I want to quote to you and read to you from Conversations with God, Book 1. There's so darn many notes here, I confuse myself. Okay, here we go. It is not God's function to create or uncreate the circumstances or conditions of your life. God created you in the image and likeness of God. You have created the rest through the power God has given you. God created the process of life and life itself as you know it. Yet God gave you free choice to do with life as you will. And then here's my favorite line. In this sense, you will know for you is God, in your sense, your will for you is God's will for you. You know, it's so easy to think about the selfishness of asking for ourselves, or somehow, you know, maybe in the end, the greatest thought is, hey, we're unworthy. You know, there's no way we measure up to God. You've heard me say that. This is downright blasphemy to think you're God, you know, and that whatever then goes along with all of the very special thoughts of that. But it's just, I think, so helpful to remember that your will is really God's will. Does that make sense? That's because that just sounds so big to me. But to give you confidence in yourself and the worthiness of yourself, that you can actually create what you choose and not have to second guess yourself. You know, am I worthy or is this okay? And then, so this is God. I desire first to know and experience myself in all my glory, to know who I am. Before I invented you and all the worlds of the universe, it was impossible for me to do so. Second, I desire that you shall know and experience who you really are through the power I have given you to create and experience yourself in whatever way you choose. Third, I desire for the whole life process to be an experience of constant joy, continuous creation, never-ending expansion, and total fulfillment in each moment of now. In the moment of your total knowing, you too will feel as I do always. And this was labeled later called the 5 attitudes of God. Totally joyful, loving, accepting, blessing, and grateful. So again, I hope this gives you some support for whatever it is you choose. And I'll reference later, especially say like a Joseph Campbell, you know, was probably the world's greatest scholar ever on parables and myths and fairy tales. And one of the greatest messages that underlie all of these fables and so forth was this: follow your bliss. And so if there's ever a guidance for you in terms of how you should be conducting your life or glorifying or worshiping or praising God, is to truly find your joy. Because remember, again, your joy is God's joy. Your will is God's will. You are meant to remember and recreate who you are. Nothing occurs in your life, nothing, which is not first a thought. Thoughts are like magnets drawing effects to you. The thought may not always be obvious, and thus clearly causative, as in, I'm going to contract a terrible disease. The thought may be, and usually is, far more subtle than that. I am not worthy to live. My life is always a mess. I am a loser. God is going to punish me. I am sick and tired of my life. Thoughts are a very subtle, yet extremely powerful form of energy. Words are less subtle, more dense. Actions are the most dense of all. Action is energy in heavy physical form, in heavy motion. When you think and say and act out of a negative concept such as, I am a loser, you place tremendous creative energy in the motion. Small wonder you come down with a cold. That would be the least of it. And so appreciate my background also then in mind body medicine and how, as I call symptoms or benevolent messengers, they'll let you know something's out of your life. And as awkward as this can be, certainly when I was working in this field so much, the idea that you created your own illness, a lot of people found that really, really difficult to accept and maybe actually quite inappropriate. The idea that you create some guilt that you caused your illness. But I want to impress upon you not only the power of prayer, which is thought, but that all of your thoughts count. And so I remember telling you in another presentation recently about the law of attraction. And I remember The Secret, remember how popular that was. And so it brought a lot of very positive attention, but a lot of negative comments as well. And then people commenting any number of reasons why the law of attraction doesn't work. And so my explanation for that was that 80% of the time, your thoughts are negative. So if you think that you're going to be negative 80% of the time, yeah, and your prayers or the idea that the law of attraction is going to work, what you focus on is what you attract. Do you understand that most of the time you're going to attract the negative? Does that make sense? So be very careful with your thought. And it can be, at least in my experience in thought, really quite a distraction. Life becomes so fun. I have to worry about what I'm thinking about all the time. But with practice, and when you understand what you can do to be well and to stay well, so we learn so much more now, especially about food, right? That what you eat really matters. And so most of us, I think today, are more conscious of making sure we're getting more fruits and vegetables and so forth, right? Staying away from white flour and sugar as best we can. But the power of your thoughts, in my opinion, is even more powerful, is even more important. And even when Dean Ornish did his research with heart disease, and remember how well he became known for having a more vegetarian diet? Let me remind you how important that is as a kind of a digression for a moment. But when Dean Ornish did his research, published in a major medical journal, he had 200 patients, divided them in groups of 100 randomly. Then the one group followed the American Heart Disease diet. You would think that's a good thing. And then the other practices much more strict vegetarian diet. 100 out of 100 of the American Heart Disease diet got worse. 99 out of 100 of Dean Ornish's group got better. So this is real. What you eat matters. I'm going to say it again. What you think is even more powerful. And Dean Ornish, for as well known as he became with his vegetarian diet, in the end, he said the most important component is your ability to manage the stress in your life. So I encourage you to follow your bliss and be careful with your thoughts. So we also know through quantum physics, I don't want to belabor this, but the consciousness really does create. Again, my comfort in knowing that physicists who actually were awarded the Nobel Prize in physics was because of their findings in quantum physics. And one of their major agreements was the idea that consciousness creates, that at the smallest of the small, in terms of physical matter, we get down to as small as we can measure at this time. It's actually just potential energy, there's no form. But then when you attempt to measure it or observe it is when it actually takes form. So it's fascinating to know how serious this is. But again, the power you have to create what it is you want. I mentioned Esther and Jerry Hicks and the law of attraction. So if any of you are interested, I made some notes of some people and their titles of their books. But in 2007, Esther and Jerry Hicks published their book, The Amazing Power of Deliberate Intent. And then I suspect many of you know Lynn McTaggart and her original book, The Field, which I like so well because she's a journalist and she has a very good way of describing difficult concepts. So if you really want, I think, an understandable and clear attempt to explain quantum physics, I recommend Lynn McTaggart and her book, The Field. She also wrote a book called The Intention Experiment, Using Your Thoughts to Change Your Life and the World. And then I also suspect many of you know Greg Braden and some of the titles of his books. One that got my attention was Secrets of the Lost Mode of Prayer, and the major statement that feeling is the prayer. So when Greg Braden was on a trip to India at one time and talking with Buddhists and major leaders in Buddhism in particular, but asking what is it about prayer that really makes it work? What is so important? And there was no question, there was no hesitation. It's about the feeling. So I really want to impress upon you today is what you can carry away with you today is that feeling, like the title of my talk today, is about the art of believing, but also feeling. Neville Goddard was so clear that in the end, it's the feeling that really matters. So be able to feel the end result, whatever it is you want, as though it were absolutely the case. And then I do want to actually quote from Neville Goddard's book. This one comes from his book, Feeling is the Secret, which he wrote in 1944. And then the third chapter of that book is literally titled Prayer. Prayer is not so much what you ask for as how you prepare for its reception. Whatsoever things ye desire, when ye pray, believe that you have received them, and ye shall have them. That comes from Mark in the Bible, New Testament. The only condition required is that you believe your prayers are already realized. Prayer is the art of assuming the feeling of being and having that which you want. And then Joseph Campbell. Be a living prayer. Follow your bliss, your highest enthusiasm. All we need to do to change the world around us is to live the rapture within, and that it is here, and know your connection with all that is. And then I'm not sure, honestly, where this particular quote comes from next, but I've known about it for a long time, and I really like this. If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough. And then thoughts around faith, trust, understanding, knowing, a confident expectation, which is asking a lot. I really believe that this idea that you really know you are God and you can have anything you want. In fact, just this past week, I had the opportunity to be involved in a channeled conversation and was asked to ask questions. And so I said, I'm talking about prayer on Sunday. Would you like to tell me some things I might be able to use Sunday when I talk? So here's what I was told. Prayer is creating a reality that we're ready to receive, experience, and embody. But it is coordinated with our missions and lessons. And the importance of this is because the statement later that came out was the only thing limiting you is your imagination and then your absolute belief that you can do it. But the reality also, as I understand it, is we come in with a soul script that we arranged before we got here. So there's some things you absolutely came to experience. And so, like the little story I love from Conversations with God about the one little angel that wanted to learn about forgiveness. So his best friend said, well, I can show you. That's the best way I know, what it is to have to experience or forgive. But he said, you must remember this. I'm only doing this because I love you. So purposely, the idea is that these two little angels come and experience human life, and the one goes out of his way in absolute love to do something that then his little friend will have to learn to forgive. The point of this, do you appreciate then, you may count into a given existence with the absolute love and of service for another, that you would do something in this particular realm of duality where what's hot without cold. So you have to experience, as Conversations with God would say, experience what love is not in order to more fully appreciate what it is. But I don't want to take your confidence from that you truly can have what you choose to create. And then otherwise trust or have faith that is, I forget this author now, but the idea of loving what is just trusting and loving in what is. Oh, I made this comment too. Just this week, I saw on TV where I'd seen this many times before. And they talk about something like the Great Pyramids. How in the world did the Great Pyramids ever get built? And then they talk about the precision and all, and the size of these rocks and so forth. Where in the world did they get them? How could they possibly transport them to this point? We can't do this today. And so I asked about that and was told that God can create out of thin air. And guess what? So can you. And so when I told you before about Baird Spalding's books and living with the masters in the Himalayas, and the idea that something's preposterous sounding as a virgin birth, or the idea that you've got one fish and one loaf of bread and you can feed hundreds. How does that happen? And again, it was actually said in those books, with Baird Spalding being part of this scientific group, going there to live with these masters for years to learn what they do and how they do it. And honest to goodness, that you can create a thin air. You know how those pyramids got built? Somebody believed it enough. What do you think of that? And that's a fun thought. Prayer is your love letter to God. This is part of that channel message. Climbing inside God's heart and Him holding that prayer, love, and fear. And another very important thought. I'm often curious to check, although the reading is so stiff, this is very personal for me, but A Course in Miracles. So many people believe, and I think for good reason, in the material in the Course in Miracles. But anyhow, one of the statements out of the Course in Miracles that I found was, the secret of true prayer is to forget the things you think you need. And so I asked this in this channeled conversation also, would you comment on that? And he said, prayer is more useful when we pray compassionately for others, because all are connected, and the very practical part, like the idea of you reap what you sow, it comes back 10,000 fold. So I don't want you to hesitate to pray for yourself and Because I'm tempted to say ask for rather than you can simply say this is and claim it as fact. But because of our connection, when you're praying for another, when you think that all thoughts count anyhow, if you're praying for another, the original thought goes through you first before it ever goes out. So it's actually a very practical reason why, not that I'm telling you to pray for somebody else because you'll get it back. Pray for someone else because you really love and care. But in that process, and because of the connectedness of everything, it actually comes back to you manyfold greater. Okay. Then here's a last comment I want to make. You know, life is difficult. It just is. And so we can forget about who we are. In fact, I wrote about in my book, Why Love Feels, the idea of forgotten identity. I think it's the greatest ailment we have, is forgetting that we have the power we do to create our lives. So what I'm recommending is that when you find yourself thinking negatively or doubting, worrying, fearful, is that you have a word or a phrase that you can bring to mind as soon as you can to put you back resonating with the core truth of who you really are. And so my first word or thought for you is the word unity. Hopefully you would relate to that quite well. So again, because you know the power of thought is so powerful, is as you catch yourself, remind yourself, unity, that everything is connected and that it's all okay. Like the hymn that goes, all is well, safely rest, God is nigh. Another one is, I choose love. This came out of another channeled book. I don't know if any of you are familiar with the channeled book titled Emmanuel. It's rather new to me, although it's not new. But if you're not familiar with Emmanuel, I seriously encourage you to read that. It reads like poetry. It's beautiful and it's simple, very clear statements. So I choose love. This is one I use. I like this one. I align with love. So just again, as another thing you can say to yourself to remind yourself to get back on track. And as a single word, I love the word harmony. Is if you do a thought about the idea that even in quantum physics, underlying everything is this quantum field of harmony and order. So if there's anything I think that we could ever want for ourselves and for everyone is harmony. Or like this idea of I love what is. Just trusting that whatever is happening is in absolutely my best interest, even though it may not always seem or feel that way. And then I would like to take you through a meditation that will come out of Conversations with God, Book 3, and then we'll be open for a discussion of anything I've said or any questions you might have. So if we're ready here, if you make yourself comfortable, and then close your eyes as a way of helping you focus. In the creation of individual reality, thought control, or what some might call prayer, is everything. Thought control is the highest form of prayer. Therefore, think only on good things and righteous. Dwell not in negativity and darkness. And even in the moments when things look bleak, especially in those moments, see only perfection, express only gratefulness, and then imagine only what manifestation of perfection you choose next. In this formula is found tranquility. In this process is found peace. In this awareness is found joy. And so now I want you to take time and, as I just said, see only perfection, express only gratefulness, and then imagine only what manifestation of perfection you choose. Again, please now take your time and offer your prayer, knowing that God grants, of course, all prayer. Take your time. Thank you very much. And now, you want to get into the discussion, Deanna?
Sure.
Yeah. So again, I absolutely welcome your questions or comments, and I'll do my best to respond.
Thank you.
Oh, hi.
Yeah. I just want to comment on the spiritual saying, I am God. I come from the time when that was unheard of and you felt like it was blasphemy to say, I am God. This was back in the early, would have been the 1970s. I was raised with a unity philosophy by mother, but she didn't have the books or the information. She somehow just knew unity. Anyway, that wasn't a foreign thought to me, but I went to this church there in the Seattle area to a new situation. And he had us when we're standing up. He said, I want you to close your eyes and say to yourself, say it out loud, I am God. We all looked around, maybe lightning or something might have happened. But at any rate, that was my introduction in the 70s when we could say that and it makes sense to us. I know whatever you say always harks back to it.
Yeah. And I like when, again, there's evidence for this or great reason or logic. So when I was first working as a psychologist, I was so naive. You're taught things to fix people. And I quickly realized you just don't fix some things. So when people, and especially when I was working in a rehab hospital where people primarily were recovering from strokes, and not everybody, in fact, was able to just get well. And one of the awkward moments was when somebody had to say to the patient family, you have to be discharged to, and you want to talk about a term you didn't like to hear, nursing home. But the point is, I was beside myself to help people with what I just called suffering. How could I help them better that way? And that's when I found myself going outside of the scientific literature to look at other philosophies or approaches to dealing with pain or illness, whatever. And in this process, especially when I was reading some more spiritual literature, was learning that, well, one is partly my sense of humor, but truth. Religions disagree on almost everything. Now, not everyone with everything, but just think about the logic of why there's so many religions, because they don't always agree. Anyhow, what they did agree on was two major points. That fascinated me. And one was a golden rule. Literally every major religion believes in the golden rule. treat others the way you like to be treated. Couldn't be more logical. You reap what you sow. We know that now in quantum physics and so many other things. But you know what the other one was? We are all one with all that is. We are God. Every major religion believes this. And I know when I got to know some clergy well, going through the kind of work I did, I say, when was the last time you told your congregation that one? Again, it's blasphemy. It's great. I joke, we have psychiatric diagnoses for people who think they're God. Yeah, so I can absolutely resonate, appreciate what you're saying. It's craziness, except it isn't. Everything now adds up for me. That is absolutely the case. But obviously, I defer to you and to unity around the major premises is indeed what? Unity, that we are one with God. We have the power of God within us. It's like it's our DNA. So, we talk about, we have academic intelligence, which is referred to as our IQ. And then we learned about the social intelligence. Well, what about spiritual intelligence? Is that so far-fetched to think that within us, we have a spiritual intelligence? We can access the God part of us? That just seems so reasonable to me. And so I encourage you as best you can. And it won't be easy in my experience. Remember, I'm the psychologist. I know what happens in early childhood. And you're not brought up thinking you're God. You think you're like worms groveling in the dust, unworthy as can be. You're so sinful, someone had to come to this earth to save you. That's not your nature. That's a learned idea. And again, with all due respect to any other belief system, I really want you to think about the core truth of who you really are. Yeah.
When we were doing our meditation, I was thinking about perfection, and what spoke to me was perfection is subjective, and my perfection is, or perfection for me is. And so it was hard for me to wrap my head around perfection. And I thought, well, it's subjective. And when I was thinking perfection for me would be to experience harmony and joy and confidence, less fear. So it was an interesting thing to kind of hear. And it's not black and white. It's kind of personal to me. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I find for myself personally, like the idea of stopping and reminding yourself of the word or a term is the idea that I completely love and accept myself. And what works for me is thinking the idea of this soul script. So before you came in, it's like the play was written and you're the actors. But who determines how well you play your part? I mean, even if the script is already written, right? You still have to play your part. And so, however, at least as a way of I think of it in my perspective is I chose this role to play. And you understand, it can't be perfect. You came into a reality where, again, you have opposites. And, even I think about the logic of learning. How do you learn if there's no feedback? And so you learn, we say, through your mistakes. But a part of me goes, who knows what mistakes are? Like this idea, you think you've got it all figured out. Now, I'll tell you, if there's one certainty, the day you think you know it all, you absolutely do not. So, yes,
I
hi.
have a couple comments that pop up about the idea of perfection. One is that at one point in my life, I may not, what I think of as my desires, some of the things I will eventually desire haven't even been born yet. So what's perfect for me at that moment may not include something that will and bring me joy even later, because I haven't even gotten to the point where I think that that's valuable. Two, I can't look back at my life without saying that over and over and over again. I throw out the I would really like with all my heart, and I get back something I couldn't have even thought of. It is so much more than I knew I would like, but something knows me better than I even am aware. So that I get laid out 9 or 10 factors when I was only holding out 2 or 3 that match me and what would please me. And I can only come to the conclusion that that is God's enjoyment. So when you say your will is God's will for us is our joy. And that's how it plays out. Because I can't possibly know all the factors of anyone's setting or situation that could possibly come together and be for the good of all the people involved. So perfection in and of itself is an abstraction. It's not a specific, like something that the ego can define. It's just it's more of a feeling of wowness, and it's a moving, changing thing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's why I like the idea of follow your bliss. My book, Doctor's Orders, Go Fishing. Do what brings you the greatest joy and meaning in your life. And even Esther Hicks would say through Abraham, she calls it an emotional guidance system. If it feels right, as subjective as that is I really believe that that is a great guide for you, that you're on the right track.
There's a little mindfulness prayer that I will say when I'm facing a situation that is daunting and there's going to be change. And what I basically say is this or something better, and leave myself not knowing what the something better might be. And in times when I change was coming to me and I didn't know if my circumstances were going to change or stay the same, I would say this or something better. I don't know how good you can make it for me, but I know it's gonna be great no matter what. I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't have the imagination big enough to know. Show me and leave my mind open to that. It's worked really well.
Yeah.
I have a good life. I'm very happy with, even when things are challenging. It always seems to come out that even though I may not like the outcome, I stop and ask, this may not have been the outcome I thought I'd like, but if I live with it for a while, let us see where the gifts in it are.
Yeah. My intuition works with pieces of songs, phrases from songs. And so what will happen for me in instances like that, and it may sound odd to you, but when I get the song, I know it. 100 bottles of beer on the wall, 100 bottles of beer. If one of those bottles should happen to fall, 99 bottles of beer. So it's a lovely reminder, and I just usually smile. Thanks for reminding me. Yeah, sometimes things don't go the way I think they should. But here's another very comforting thought. I've literally been part of thousands of channeled conversations. And one of the thoughts that came up from when you were saying this that really comforts me is we have so much guidance from the spirit world, whether you call them angels or spirit guides, whatever the spiritual figure. There is so much guidance. I don't know how they don't get in their own way. It is, in fact, it almost sounds like fate, which bothers me. I don't like this soul script is fated. It is not, but not only do you have a soul script, you have so much help to help you do what you came to do. It's even like the idea that you have more spiritual help than there are grains of sand in the world. And I'm not exaggerating that in the way I've been told over the years. It's a great confidence and support to know, however, we can get to that point in our lives that all is well, safely rest, God is nigh.
Amen.
Yeah. The way I do therapy is to help people go inside, because we can try to figure stuff out, but there's a part of you that knows exactly what you need to do. And one of the things, especially early on when I would do this work, and people would connect with that's called a soul-like part or soul. They're literally their soul and guiding them. It was often ended, a statement coming through was that I'm closer than a breath away. And at first I didn't really understand that, but as I, just stayed with it, it's the idea, well, of course. I was like, duh, God is within you. So you have that guidance. And it is even as it would say in so much we read, is even before you ask, I have answered. Yeah, but again, it comes back to this faith or trust, or ideally a knowing all is well. I'm done. I'm told my time is up. Yeah, I do have one more thing to add, and I'll leave flyers behind. I'm giving a talk on the power of your mind and imagination, actually a one-day workshop in Newport at the